We'll keep going. I want to share a few thoughts from the American side, and I will breeze through these, but I do want people to kind of understand that there is a kind of what's happening as it relates to economic development. We tend to think about imagination and creativity as the same thing, but indeed they're actually very different things. They have different functions, but all human knowledge that we have today did begin as imagination. And so thinking about the stories that we tell in the data, like Seda showed, and like the presentations earlier, all of these are telling stories. The economists tell a story, the neuroscientists tell a story, but collectively, I think the challenge at hand when we talk about creativity is really, can we live the best story that we can tell? The exponential change of the world is such that you go back 100 years, a grandmother and her great granddaughter would live more or less the same exact life, but it is so fast paced today that a grandmother and her granddaughter are going to live radically different lives because of the pace of information and technology. Here in the United States, the way we work has become a drag on national innovation. The typical American worker, for instance, will spend more hours of their waking life at work than any other part of it. And yet the place that we are going to be spending all of that time, toxic work culture, is the #1 reason that is driving the Great Resignation and the reason that people are leaving their jobs here in the US. Our health systems and our educational systems have become even further stressed during COVID. Nearly 1 in 5 healthcare workers are going to be quit their jobs during the pandemic. Racial and ethnic health disparities contribute even further to this policy and economic imperative. In the creative economy, we employ more 18 to 25-year-olds than any other sector, but even in the creative economy, most of its fastest growing area, for example, in game development, most of those game developers are white, and just about 8% of the characters in those games are females of non-white ethnicities. In the US, 1 in 4 American teachers are considering leaving their jobs. Here in Colorado, it's 1 in 3. And as Linda Grattan at the London Business School has points out in her book, 100-Year Life, about every decade or so since the 1940s, we've added globally about 2 years to life expectancy. But if you think about the economic systems that come out of an industrial economy model here in the US anyway, you get your education and then you go to work, and then maybe if you're lucky enough, you retire at some point. But as we look at Gen Z, specifically Gen Z, their expectations and their plans are very different than we've ever seen before. And I think we're seeing this to play out in the Great Resignation. So people are not just going to work in one industry, but will work in multiple industries across their lives. A lion's share of the jobs that are among the most competitive today didn't even exist 10 years ago. And so when we think about the implications of that, the speed at which information and everything is coming at us, and creativity and well-being become very important. We've began incorporating some of this work in the US. Wendy Lee, who you'll be hearing from earlier, she is the head of Energize Colorado. We did a study led by Wendy and myself and others. McKinsey & Company was also involved, measuring the resilience of small business in the state of Colorado over the last 18 months. What was interesting about this, we split it up in terms of operational capital, the things that you typically tend to think about and what creates small business success. But then we had another category called social capital. We measured things like hope, trust, technological adoption, belonging, community connectivity. This category here, the social capital category, explained more of the variance of which businesses were successful and resilient during COVID and which were not than did any other metrics, including access to capital. So the way that we can think about something like GDP as a lagging indicator, GDP is going to tell us what happened, but why did it happen and what can we learn from it and plan ahead? And this is where these metrics like hope and trust, belonging, creativity offer great potential for us all. I want to spend just a second talking about creativity myths and facts. I'll drop this link in the chat for you. This is a stellar group of researchers in creativity who have looked at across different countries what people believe about creativity and what is the facts about creativity. So for example, one of the common myths around creativity is that children are more creative than adults, and that is just not true. So I'm not going to go through all of these today. I'm going to save us some time, but then when we look at the creativity facts, positive moods can help people getting creative ideas. Creative people are usually open to more experiences. We can measure this through things like assessments of curiosity, and in a lot of studies, what has been shown here very recently is that curiosity is more important for innovation than mindfulness in the company context. And so we're at the beginning of what is going to become an incredible jump forward in how we bring all this together. This is work from Dr. Teresa Mablé at Harvard Business School. She's studied the environmental conditions of creativity throughout her career. And so one of the kind of the findings of this that I think is really important for any economic development person or any corporate leader to understand is that whether or not a individual who has a lived experience here in the US, I'll use those as context because they're the ones I understand the best. So an LGBT person or a Black employee, whether their lived experience provides them a novel insight into a solution or a challenge that a company is having, that novel insight may or may not become enterprise-wide innovation. And it primarily depends upon the perceived alignment of that individual with the novel insight with the motivations and alignments of the company. So perception in these kind of things has real economic implications to it. And so here in Colorado, we just launched the Imaginator Academy, which is designed to create a national data set. Our goal here is to become the Gallup of imagination data. And with this, what we're planning to do is to take all of these different metrics that we're assessing, and we've pulled them from fields of population health, public health, management literature, and entrepreneurship literature, creativity sciences. All of the metrics that we're using have been shown to be predictive or causally related to many different outcomes that range from population health, education, economic performance, all the way to firm profitability. Here is kind of the data map of what we are getting ready, or what we have already begun assessing in the national data set we're collecting. So we're looking at how the people's different identity, their present perceived way of making meaning and creating value in the world, how do those identities inform how hope and optimism is not the same thing. Optimism is a belief that in the future things are going to work out. I don't have to do anything. It's a belief that I have. Hope is a personal agency question. Hope measures that because of my actions, I can create a future uncertain state. Trust, this is a topic for nations and companies alike. And then belonging. And then these areas here, we believe mediates the experience that different individuals have around culture change that we measure through curiosity, well-being, sense of awe, compassion, and then the experience of innovation. And this set of metrics here that we're assessing has been developed with Penn State's Cognitive Neuroscience Creativity Lab, who I was originally connected with, Usetta, in my work with her in the Sonophilia Foundation. So there is a growing network of creativity scientists around the globe that are beginning to ask these things in relationship to economic advancement. And the last slide I'll share with you is called future casting. So whatever we create, the types of organizations that we pour that creativity, that we pour those kind of concepts into, is going to shape what the outcome is. So from a mechanism standpoint, a cultural and creative entrepreneur in one of the North African countries in the Mediterranean is using the same mechanisms of creating meaning and making value that somebody like Mark Zuckerberg in Silicon Valley is using from a mechanism standpoint. But the types of organizations that they are pouring that energy into is shaping what those outcomes become. And so Margaret Bowden is one of the transformative leaders who has been writing about where does human creativity end and machine learning begin since the 1970s. She puts it in 3 columns. There's exploratory creativity, where you have a gatekeeper who determines, is this novel idea valuable? A good example of that would be a pharmacological intervention. It is a great idea there to have a chemist who says that that novel idea that you've come up with is going to kill a person if you give it to them. That feels like a good idea to have a gatekeeper there. But once we move into value creation that is more social or more cultural in nature, who becomes the gatekeeper in those situations? I think is an open question that a lot of the work that we're talking about here could feed into and align with going forward. Then there's combinatory creativity. I take an idea from here, an idea from here, I put them together. That reaches the novel part of creativity. But is it valuable? Maybe, maybe not. Who's to say? And then there's transformative creativity. And I think the brain capital work is getting at a notion of transformative creativity, because transformative creativity is where something comes along that so foundationally alters the way we thought about value creation in that first exploratory column, that the questions that we ask there don't even apply in the same way anymore. An example of that would be the iPhone. When it came along, we had a microchip that was producing a product that was called a computer, that was called a calculator, that was called a GPS system. All of those products and economic value created from the selling of those is how we define the value it was creating. But here comes the iPhone along. And then all of those questions around value, economic value creation of those products don't even apply in the same way anymore, because the iPhone collapses all of those tangible 3-dimensional products into a platform. And now we talk about apps as value creation. So there are real economic consequences and opportunities in all this work. And I'm very excited to be learning from the rest of you all today. I'm going to end here and we'll begin to navigate into our first session, Brain Capital, Creativity, and Well-Being. Just a show of hands or a little feedback from the floor there. Does anyone need a 2-minute break just to stand up and stretch their legs or anything before we?
Theo, do you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes, I do.
Let's move on to session 2, and please start with Pierluigi, because he has to leave at 4:30.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we can start. We're fine. Whoever wants to stretch the leg, they can move around. So it's not a problem here. Go ahead.
Sounds good. So Pierluigi, would you like to start us off? We'd ask each of the speakers to respond to the questions that we sent yesterday. After what you've heard around brain capital, around creativity, where do you see the application in your day-to-day of this work? What is missing from it? And how might this collective work that we're putting together be able to advance the thing that is driving you in your professional life on a day-to-day basis? So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Theo, and sorry for being in such a time pressure, but today is a bit complicated for me, unfortunately. So first of all, a little background. I worked in the European Commission for a while as the special advisor to the Commissioner for Culture. And from the very beginning, my work has really been about how and why culture is so important for humans. So I think that there is an incredible area of opportunity in terms of taking a neuroscience-informed approach to the behavioral impacts and transformational impacts of culture on psychological well-being, on innovation capacity, on sociability, and so on and so forth. Afterwards, I've taken a position as a senior advisor at the OECD, but at the Center for Entrepreneurship, not the one in which the initiative of neuroscience-inspired policy was launched. And I have just been now asked to become the director of the systems area of the just being launched European Institute of Technology, New KIC, Knowledge and Innovation Community on Culture and Creative Industry. So my focus from this point of view is that there is a huge, enormous opportunity today from making culture a platform for biobehavioral change to tackle societal challenges like, for example, global climate change, of course, the post-pandemic global health issues, or let's say, of course, the innovation race. From this point of view, we are creating at my university in Pescara an interdisciplinary research center that puts together cultural economists like myself, molecular biologists, and psychologists and neuroscientists. Our idea is to work on both dimensions of the neuroscience foundation of cultural experience. So we are not simply interested, let's say, in the neuroaesthetics or these aspects, but we are really into the behavioral change and the physiological responses from cultural experience. So on one side, we are focusing on issues of interoception, allostasis, and the predictive brain free energy principle implications of this approach, and hormonal response. So we're working on a lot already, for example, in terms of cortisol response to certain types of cultural experiences. On the other side, of course, we are working also the more behavioral dimensions like flourishing, the impact of executive function or self-efficacy, and social engagement. So I think that there is a huge preparedness at the moment from policy institutions to receive this kind of insight, because of course the point now is that there is a vague understanding that culture can make the difference. Think of the New European Bauhaus initiative that connects, for example, cultural production and participation to environmental sustainability and green transition. But the big question is how? So it's extremely important to understand what are the pathways and to understand what are the ways in which we can measure this. If we take a comprehensive toolkit approach, really ranging from your molecular biology to applied behavioral science, I think we have an exciting possibility here. And the implications are not just confined to culture and social transformation, because of course, culture today is so important for organizational behavior, it's so important for leadership studies, it's so important for just everything. So I think that this initiative could not be more timely. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation, and if there will be any more opportunity to kick the ball further off, of course, I'm totally in the game.
Thank you for those wonderful comments. I'm really excited about the work that you outlined there and to learn more about it. To keep us moving, Dominic Treble, could we hear from you, your thoughts on what you've heard so far? Is Dominic here? Okay, Carlo, how about you?
Hello?
Yes, hi, Carlo.
Yes, you are calling me in? Okay. I would just like to say something about creativity, the question that, and I will start in a way which is provocative. I don't like indeed brain capital, health, and skills. I would like much more brain and body, so human flourishing for all within the planetary boundaries. Why I'm saying this? Because what stops creativity is when you define the boundary of a discussion or any system, and you say, these are the boundary. If you go out of the boundary, you are out of thematic, out of topic. There is the risk for, I think, also in this brain capital concept, which is absolutely interesting. So the mind is, I'm provocative, but I'm not at the very end, the critic. I'm telling only that the fact that brain capital is assuming that mental health and skills are needed for a more productive economy is narrowing the goal to what is the scope of the organizations that are interested in this concept. You need to reverse and to see from the point of view of the people that is in the organization. Are the organization that need to change to let the people flourish, not the contrary. Not the people have to be in a good mental and positive health state for being more productive for the organization. Because I think that the most important, the most interesting concept that I just heard about what is important in creativity is that from Sarah Rhodes, is that creativity don't start from problem solving, but from problem findings. And the real problem is that in many organizations, there are some assumptions that cannot be touched. So people don't start to seek for problems, but immediately start for finding solutions to problems that have been defined by the organization or by them. So I think that around this concept, there is really the space or not for creating more creative environment, which is really, I think, the importance of this attempt of measuring brain, and not only brain, also body, human, I think, capital, flourishing indicators, which, if they are only somehow narrowed to the concept of capital, so a means for an end, which is productivity, actually you are closing a little the discussion, narrowing the discussion. Should be more open in that sense. Okay.
Wonderful comments. Thank you so much. Let's go to Enrique next from MedWaves.
Okay. I don't know. Can you hear me, Theo?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. That's great. Okay, so well, thank you much. First of all, to my colleague and friend Brim for having given me the chance to join all of you today. And also, of course, I thank Harris for having agreed on that. Yesterday at 11:30 p.m., I was telling Rim I didn't know yet how I could take the most of these few minutes I was given to try to be useful for the purposes of the project in general and today's meeting in particular. So early this morning, I decided to base my speech on a kind of, let's call it, alcoholic anonymous approach. That means that I will be talking from the perspective of a person with a certain mental condition. Therefore, almost everything I will be saying based just on a personal and subjective experience. So I'm Enrique, and I am diagnosed with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, together with personality disorder and sleep disorder, so all the package. Also, since I was 39 years old, so I developed a heart condition, which is called, as is known as atrial fibrillation. That is the most common heart condition, but it's not that common for people under 60 years old. In that sense, after many years of reading scientific literature, talking with doctors and observing myself, I realized that my mental conditions probably played a relevant role as psychosomatic cause in developing that heart condition in a quite young age, even though I had also a genetic predisposition to develop that condition when I got older at some moment of my life. With all that, I'm doing fine, really. My family loves me. I have great friends, and I keep a good relationship with my ex-partners, well, with almost all of them. Also, for more than 20 years, I have been honored to work in my institution, my Waves, and to grow both professionally and personally with an incredible brilliant team of people. So continuing with my life. From the age of 6, when I started school, I began to develop certain difficulties and insecurities in socializing with other children, in particular, and with people in general. But during the 80s, the words psychology or psychotherapy were taboo in Spain, and neither me nor my parents thought that I could need some sort of help. Therefore, throughout all my life, I have had to deal with those difficulties in socializing, both in my personal and professional development. Probably some of you have also had to deal with similar difficulties during your lives. And in that sense, during our life and our experiences, we have strived to develop skills to deal with those difficulties. And in fact, those skills have shaped our personality. Also, some of us have decided at some moment to also rely on psychological and psychiatric treatment and to take psychopharmaceuticals. In any case, most probably most of us started to pay attention to the way our mental health was evolving when we were already adults, too old So first reflection I would like to share with you, and in fact, of course, were already mentioned here, but I think it's still worth that I reflect on that. I think that we all agree that brain economy, so brain capital economy, should be that one where mental health development is a strategic axis in the economic development of countries, on in which mental development issues are taken care in the education system from the early stage of life of human beings, and one in which children are helped to understand and to manage their emotions, as well as to understand and manage their relationships with the others and with our planet. While I was writing this, I was thinking that maybe it was just I was just saying something that is absolutely evident for everybody joining this meeting. But even though I have no kids and I have family and friends who share sorry, I have no kids. I have family and friends who share the concern on the inexistence of a proper way of integrating in the school curricula issues like emotional intelligence, mindfulness, as well as other disciplines to educate kids on mental health. So coming back to my experience as someone diagnosed with a mental health condition. Since 2012, I have been going to both psychological and psychiatric treatment, and I have been periodically taking antidepressants and anxiolytics. However, out of all these years looking for support to help me keep mentally balanced, physical activity has always played a key role in keeping me sane. Of course, psychological and psychiatric sciences and research are absolutely crucial in preventing or treating mental disorders. Likewise, psychopharmaceuticals are necessary in many occasions. However, because of my condition for many years, I have had the chance to talk and learn from several psychiatrists. Likewise, for years, I have been an eager reader of a scientific dissemination in the field of psychiatry and psychopharmaceuticals. In that sense, I have been able to learn that our society is, especially in the so-called developed countries, overdiagnosing mental conditions and therefore medicalizing ordinary life. And in that sense, I think that we have the dilemma to face that, to face that has huge economic and social consequences, depending on the decisions that are taken by companies and governments on how address mental health in order to really shift to a brain economy instead of to a narcotization-based economy. So to finish, second reflection I wanted to share with you in this speech. There is plenty of scientific evidence that physical activity and exercise is at least as efficient as psychopharmaceuticals and therapy. In that sense, taking into account that physical activity and exercise also provide many other benefits to health and diseases prevention, it is difficult to understand why they are not yet broadly integrated as therapeutic resources by many specialists. In that sense, I would eagerly like to recommend you to read this book from the Nobel Prize, Daniel E. Lieberman, Exercise It, The Science of Physical Activity. He's not paying me, of course. I don't know, he still knows me, not yet. Okay, with all that, I think in that sense that brain economy, or sure all of us think that brain capital economy, sorry, should be that one where physical activity and exercise for mental health and healthy aging in population is an axis in the strategy for economic development of a country. One in which physical activity and exercise is tailor-made for the specific physical and mental conditions of each person. And of course, at some other moment, we'll have time to longly discuss on this issue. And one, in that sense, we're talking about on an economy in which the benefits of physical activity and exercise are integrated in all aspects of the people's life: school, family, work, atmosphere. In fact, I would have been more able to pay attention to all the important information I was receiving from this colleague if I was having the opportunity maybe to stand up and to walk a little bit, because I'm a kind of nervous person. So health and leisure, so that's it. Thank you very much, that's it.
Thank you, Enrique. I really appreciate how all of the speakers are servicing kind of one of the biggest challenges around something like creativity and well-being is there is a highly subjective contextual factor here that we do have to account for. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. Let's navigate next to Raul from the University of Barcelona.
Okay, thank you. Does it work? Can you hear me well? Yes, perfect. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. It's not easy to talk after Enrique. For sure, my intervention is not so interesting. I think that just to give you some background, I'm applied economist, and I started to do research around 25 years ago. And when I started to do research, my main topic was regional economic growth. So you can imagine that what I was doing was just to find some measure of what was growth or development. We can use these two words as synonymous in this context. How can I proxy that? And what are the drivers? Okay, so from what we have learned today from your project, I think that now I will do my research in a very different way. In fact, life has brought me to a different approach, as I will explain later on. But the first idea is that, okay, how we measure development, how we measure growth as economists is probably the wrong way to do it. And the OECD has been quite in advance to what, let's say, standard economists have been doing, because I think it was 2011, they started to publish their first report on quality of life. This was the concept at that moment. This evolved to well-being. And I think that now probably the next concept will be brain capital. Okay? So I think that the project is well on the natural evolution of how do we measure the outcomes that we would like to promote in our society. And from that perspective, the World Bank with the Sustainable Development Goals has also recognized the need to take into account health and well-being. And I think that this is also relevant in this context. If I move to the other part of the story, the drivers, of course, here, human capital is a concept that has appeared. Education in general was one of the contexts where I wanted to focus my research, okay? Because this was having a clear influence on people's life, okay? Something that also we need to take into account as researchers, that we want to make a research that is useful for the society. And at that moment, I think that education was my focus. We have heard from Enrique that we have been quite wrong in that perspective, and also this is behind the project. Assuming that human capital is something that we can measure as just years of schooling or years of experience is wrong. And also the OECD again, I'm sorry, probably they will pay me for me at some time, has also been pioneering in that. The PISA surveys that now play a different role, but at the very beginning, try to measure exactly the quality of education in countries and how we can improve the outcomes of the students and how we can make them happier, because at the end, this is what we want to do. We want to make them better persons and that they are able to be resilient, as we have said today. And the PISA surveys were very, very influencing at that stage. I think that now they have lost this role, but at that moment it was. But let me also draw the attention to the team to the survey of adults' skills, also called PIAC. It's also an OECD program covering 40 countries, where there is a very interesting set of variables that are clearly associated to the kind of things we want to measure. Okay. There is information about skills, about competences, but also in the new edition, the third round that is going to be launched soon, as about personality traits. This is something that has not appeared today up to now, I think, but if you move to the economist way of looking at some of the concepts that have appeared today as creativity, okay, you will already or immediately see the issue of the big five. Okay, and I would like to know a bit more, if we have time, about your view on that, because this issue that personality and the big five is something that determines the way you can progress in your life is quite dangerous from the perspective of public intervention, and also for the perspective of how we as individuals or as public agents can also help people to achieve their best, which is also behind this project. Let me finalize with just one idea, that is the use of the word capital, okay? For economists, the word capital has some connotations. Initial investment, rate of return, depreciation. Just these three. There are others, as Rim knows better than me. So here I think that it's very important that we take into account these three ideas. because this also brings us to the next question, that is, who is going to pay for the investment? And I was happy to hear in your first intervention that this is something that's covered. The second one is, okay, who gets the return for the investment? Is it only private, is just an individual issue, or is also a public return to this investment? And again, here I think that the project is well aligned covering this issue. But what about depreciation? I think this also takes into account that, okay, we can only have this initial investment, but if we want to have our stock of capital stock that also appears there, constant or even growing, okay, we don't need only an initial investment. We need to do a continuous approach to that. So I will stop here. Thank you again for sharing your views with me. It has been a very interesting session, and for sure, I will learn a lot from the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raul. That was a great encapsulation of many of the conversations that have happened over the last year or two in our groups together. And I think it's interesting to me that there is so much energy around trying to push to the next place by so many parties. Next, let's come to Xavier.
Yes,
There in
thank
the
you.
room.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm a biologist specialized in Alzheimer's disease. And for 7 years, I was dedicated to research and innovation management in the University of Manresa in the region of Bages in central Catalonia. First of all, I would like to present you some unique images of some dishes. These dishes, sorry, I don't have slides. These dishes are created by some of the upcoming chiefs of the country. This is the creative results of the significant potential and of the shared agendas is able to achieve when we work closely together to meet the challenge that our community is currently facing. This is a particular example with the Bages Shared Agenda. We applied the collaborative and innovative approach to solve daily issues specialized by citizens that are suffering with dysphagia. Dysphagia is a pathology that impacts the ability of swallow food and liquids. It can impact up to 10% of the population of the Bages region. Patients may not be able to feel themselves poverty with consequence with their nutritional intake and quality of life overall. The context is Bages region is one of the most aging regions in Catalonia. In Manresa, its capital, there is the highest percentage of elderly people, up to 60%. Its dependency and over-dependency rates are very high. Consequently, the incidence of age-related diseases, such as neurodegenerative or cardiovascular diseases, stroke, coronary ischemia, is also very high. One of the most characteristic symptoms of cancer processes, neurodegenerative or cardiovascular diseases, is dysphagia. All foods should be homogenized, such as purees, with a specific texture that prevents the food from causing a loud infection by aspiration. In short, dysphagics cannot eat rice with mushrooms, for example, but they can eat a rice puree with crushed mushrooms, a homogenized meal, losing all its flavors, details, different smells, etc. This is why dysphagics have a lower quality of life, a lower well-being, which also impacts on their caregivers too. And how the Bages Shared Agenda can, through creativity, improve the well-being on people living with dysphagia. First, the methodology. Shared agendas are the application of participatory governance methodology based on the collective actions of diverse stakeholders to address a common challenge in a territory. The idea is centered on pooling knowledge coming from all possible stakeholders in order to propose better solutions to face the challenge. This activity happens in the laboratories of transformative innovation. The shared agenda brings creative alternatives that are accessible to community. In particular, example, the stakeholders involved are Manresa Council City, a public administration that provides social workers, the University of Manresa that generates a scientific research project, the companies, Natural Machines, Agrana, Sosa that provides technology, Altaya Foundation, an hospital center that provides medical experts in dysphagia, the Joviat Foundation, a cooking training center that provides experts in dietetic nutrition, elaboration dishes, and associations of dysphagics and their caregivers. And the results of the creativity process was the creation of a methodology for elaboration of dishes with 3D food technology, suitable for dysphagics. More than 90 dishes have been designed with a great diversity of flavors, nutritionally adequate, which have restored the pleasure for eating, for enjoyment, and the quality of life to dysphagics. And of course, the economic impact of dysphagia have been reduced. We aim to keep contribute to the region by introducing sustainable solutions for the benefit of the local economy to advance research and innovation, and most of all to help a local community. And this is the applied example. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was really, as I'm listening to everyone, one of the questions I'd like for everybody to start thinking, Paolo, we're gonna come to you next there in the room. But if everyone could start thinking about a question, as we think about these different types of well-being, there's a physical component, there is a mental component, there is I'm gonna say a cultural component to it, or a social component, whichever your preferred way of thinking about it. As we think about all of those components around well-being and we think about creativity, what would be a metric that we would even think about or be able to kind of lean into that could help us understand how those two things are connected in countries and organizations? I don't think we have that metric today. But if you could be thinking about where does well-being and creativity come together in some type of measurable way that could inform us and help us, that would be a really interesting question to engage the audience on. Paula, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello. Hear me? Yeah. Okay, so my name is Paula Adam. I work at the Catalan Agency for Health Quality and Assessment, which is an agency that depends on the health department of the government of Catalonia. And I am director of research, which means that I take care of ensuring that the research that the health department of the government is funding really reaches better health. So what we do is through the assessment of research, we try to anticipate or promote an impact on health. So and one of the big challenges we have is in doing this the first challenge we have is how and where to invest in research in terms of themes, but also in terms of people, but also in terms of how organizations are being organized in order to really impact on the health of the population. So what we do is first to support the policymakers in deciding what research to fund, but also we assess commission competitive calls. So it's really competitive calls where researchers or projects are being applied, and we try to do an assessment that really gives an impact on health. And the challenge we have on this is that usual indicators or the way science is being assessed or assessed or prioritized usually really focus on itself, on the science itself. So you count papers, you count number of congresses you have been, etc. But how you can, through assessment, how you can identify competences or people that could fit in, for example, in what Xavier just explained in the shared agendas in badges. No? So we could really identify what mindsets, what competences are we going to help us to find scientists that can fit in a shared agenda with the stakeholders. So, and this is a big challenge, and is the challenge that I wanted to present here. Because usually assessment systems are more seen as systems of control, you know, so controlling how a project is evolving or how a career is being evolved, but not really on how this is transforming or impacting in health. So I've seen a lot of concepts today, and that I think are that I would like to find in the intersection of creativity, brain capital, and well-being. Some of them is how the challenge of how you can identify mindsets and perceptions, but also creativity, cognitive skills, confident relationships, etc. So I just leave this as a question mark. I think my intervention is more giving a question rather than answers. I don't think we have the answer for the challenge I am facing in my job. So I wish I could, but I just leave it open for a discussion. Thank you.